Welcome to everyone coming to us from Eventbrite or any other source. We are Ama La Vida. We are a life, health and wellness, leadership, and career coaching company. And my name is Justice. I am a relationship strategist on the team. And what that means is when you schedule a time to speak with someone on our team, the chances are you'll probably end up on my calendar, if not someone else on my team's calendar. And we're going to use our half hour together to really kind of dissect your goals, your current situation, and really just try to map out what we need to do to get you there. And then I'm going to make a recommendation of a team of coaches on our team that are most qualified to help you get there, given their background, personality, and skill set, just to make sure that you're put up with the right person. And today we have our coach, Laura, here with us. And Laura is going to talk about managing your team without sounding like a parent. So Laura, go ahead and take it over. I'm handing it to you.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Justice. I appreciate your time on the introductions. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And because today is Veterans Day, I just would like to give a shout out to any of those that are joining us today that have been in the military. You have family in the military. Thank you. I greatly appreciate everything that you do to allow us to continue doing what we enjoy doing. So with that, let's go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. And Justice, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you see my screen.
Yep, we are good to go.
Okay, I'm going to put it in presentation mode so it looks a little prettier for everybody. Okay, well, how do we hold our team accountable without sounding like a parent? Let's start by getting the right slide. There we go. Today's agenda is going to be, we're going to cover what is accountability and who needs to focus on it. How do we focus on it? Why is it hard to create accountability, not only for ourselves, but also for our teams? How do we create that accountability? And then how do we create an accountability culture so that this continues to move forward and it's not one of those, I attended a webinar and I started something new. And then we're going to wrap up with the next steps, what you can do. Now, Justice did a beautiful job introducing who we are here at Alma La Vida. We support individuals to love their lives. We do this by providing coaching in career, leadership, life, and health. And me specifically, I am a leadership coach here at Alma La Vida. I am a certified leadership coach. I have 33 years in executive management, and I have 6 years of entrepreneurial experience in different industries. My contact information is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to be able to connect with individuals and be able to support everybody in their leadership journey. So moving forward, let's talk about what is accountability. And what I'm going to ask, and I told Justice this, I'm a real big proponent of let's make this a dialogue. And a dialogue means that it's more than me talking. The tough part is it's hard, I know, not being live, but if you could put in chat, when I use the word accountability, what comes to your mind? What do you think about when you hear the word accountability? In the meanwhile, I'm going to pop my chat over here so that I can see what comments are coming in. What are you thinking about if you say or hear somebody say accountability? Staying on track. Very good. Ownership. Oh my goodness, these are great. Making sure you're doing what you were told to do when no one is watching. Thank you so much. What is interesting, and I absolutely love your input here, because when most people think about accountability, many times we associate it with something negative. You know, we think about it in the sense of we're held accountable to do our jobs. However, what we think of also is from a parenting point of view. You know, our parents or our guardian figures, if you didn't do your chores at home, you couldn't have your dessert or as the song says, you can't have your pudding. You do need to be able to do your chores to get your pudding. So we quickly learn as children and growing up that either we need to be accountable so that we can get the things we want, or we miss out on something. However, we've also learned how to avoid the negative consequences if we don't fully understand. According to the book, The Oz Principle, this tendency creates a willingness to accept the justification that good enough is okay instead of conscientiously focusing on what else can be done to achieve the results. So what really is accountability? And I always like to start off with the good old dictionary. The good old dictionary defines accountability as the subject to, as I swallow, subject to having or reporting, explaining or justifying, being answerable or responsible. So when we think about this, it does sound a little bit negative. It's saying that we're justifying the way something has happened. In the book, The Oz Principle, they use a different definition of accountability. And this is going to be the definition that we're going to use as we move forward. Specifically, it says a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving desired results. So, using this definition, in the book, they use a framework of see it, own it, solve it, do it. So before we go too much further, is there a difference between the word accountability and responsibility? If you don't mind, go ahead and type into chat what you think the difference is between accountability and responsibility. I'll see if anybody's typing. I know it takes a few minutes for it to come through. Accountability is in a partnership with someone else. I like that. So it's an agreement that you have. The importance and ownership of a task. Very good. I like that one as well. So it helps us be able to see the responsibility, the accountability. Responsibility you have to do versus accountability you want to do. That is another good one. So let's go ahead and look the difference between the accountability versus responsibility. And once again, as I said, I always rely on the good old Webster Dictionary. Its definition of responsibility is the quality or state of being responsible, such as moral, legal, or mental accountability. It's reliability, it's trustworthiness. It's something for which one is responsible. The way I like to think about accountability and responsibility. Responsibility focuses on the task or the action that needs to be done. And so you are performing an action, you are responsible for completing something. While accountability focuses on the results. And this is an interesting way to frame it because as a leader, you can delegate tasks to your team. You can delegate responsibility to your team. But can you actually delegate accountability? Give me a 1 if you think you can delegate accountability, or a 2 if you don't think you can in the chat. We've got a 2, we've got a 1, we've got a 2. Got a 1. Okay, perfect. It looks like we're almost split down the middle. And the truth of the matter is, accountability is a personal choice. It's how we look at the end result and our contribution or our responsibility to complete that end result. So now that we've talked and we have a clear understanding of what is accountability and what is responsibility and where it kind of sits, let's talk about who needs to be accountable, and where does this accountability come from? So there we go. If you think about the home example, so the home family network, who is accountable in that environment? Let me share a story. Let me share an example with you. So let's say that a husband is home with the children while the wife is out working. And the husband allows the child to play video games. And the child knows they have a test tomorrow, but they choose not to study. They want to play video games. The wife comes home. She's angry at the husband because the husband allowed the child to play video games. And then the next day, the wife is angry at the child because the child fails the test. And then she's angry at the husband again. In that example, thank you. I think Anna beat me to the punch there. Who's responsible? And the truth is, everybody has a part of the accountability. I should say, who's accountable? Everybody has a portion of the accountability in that scenario. So I know the title of the presentation is How to Hold Your Team Accountable Without Sounding Like a Parent. And it really isn't fair to say that we treat our coworkers, our employees as children. That's not what we do. However, where most of us learned our definition and what accountability looks like is from early memories in the household that stem from how the parents or the guardians demonstrated accountability, and how, unfortunately, as some children, I'll put my hand up for this one, we would occasionally find ways to skip being accountable for chores or different items of that nature. However, today we're business people. We're running departments, we're running organizations, small businesses. We have people who are coming to us. We have customers who need us to be reliable, to be able to provide the service and product that we're talking to them about. So where does accountability come from in that piece? Let me share a story with you. And this is going to be a story. I do apologize. I'm going to read it right off the screen because it will be easier and I'll make sure not to miss anything. Back in 1968, McDonnell Douglas launched their newest airplane. It was the DC-8. And Japan Airlines at the time was one of the first airline company to purchase some of those brand new planes. 4 months later, Japan Airlines Flight Number 2 was attempting to land in San Francisco International Airport. And if any of you are currently in San Francisco, or if you've been to San Francisco, you know that many times the airport can be socked in with a very dense, heavy fog. And that's what happened on that day. It was very, very foggy, very hard to see. I know if you live in San Francisco, they call it soup. You can't see through it. So upon approach, flight number 2 came in too low and was unable to increase their power sufficiently to reach the landing strip. Unfortunately, flight number 2 ended up landing in the San Francisco Bay. The good news, no one was hurt. However, the media attention around the new airplane was intense. This was the first time something of that nature had happened with this brand new plane. Within a few days, the officials started their investigation. And after months, the investigation turned to call the pilot in to testify. With hundreds of news media and the FAA investigators in attendance at this meeting, Captain Osho was asked to describe what happened in his own words that day. And everybody was anticipating blame towards McDonnell Douglas. Something was wrong with the plane, or maybe the inclement weather was the cause. However, Captain Osho did something that astounded everybody. His entire testimony was 3 words long. And he said, Osho screwed up. Needless to say, the media, the FAA investigators, there was little that anybody could say. From that point forward, anytime somebody accepts responsibility for their mistake, it has now been labeled the Osho defense. Unfortunately, too many people today are not willing to take responsibility for their mistakes. And we're too quick to look for justification or reasons why we can't accomplish the tasks or meet the goals to really be able to accomplish what needs to be done. So while accountability is part of the business's responsibility, it's the manager's or the boss's responsibility, it's the team leader's responsibility, it's the customer's responsibility. The truth of the matter is accountability starts as an inside job. It starts with you. So before we start to hold the team accountable, let's talk about why accountability is hard, both from a personal accountability point of view and from the team accountability point of view. So let's go ahead and dive into that a little deeper. What ideas do you have regarding the challenges with accountability? So from a personal point of view, let me rephrase this. Why do you find accountability hard? Go ahead and type your responses in the chat for me.
Just sitting over here all by yourself. Hi, how may I help you?
Okay, well, we're waiting for some responses in the chat. I'll go ahead and move forward. Many times what people feel, determining scope, that's a good one. Professional accountability is not always clear. Oh, great input here. Many times from a team lead, I might not want to hurt someone's feelings. Maybe I don't want to create a difficult situation between the two of us. From a personal point of view, I might not want to get into trouble, or I don't want to look bad in front of my boss. Sometimes with many individuals that I talk to, they don't even know how to start. As I began in the beginning of the presentation, we talked about how we role model what our parents did for us. And if we've been very fortunate, maybe we've had some good role models through work. But if we're a new time boss and first time manager, we may not know how to hold our staff accountable. And worse yet, maybe because when we use the role models that we had, maybe it was your football coach or your track team coach or your parents, the way that they achieved accountability was by yelling at you. There's got to be another way. And I love the quote that I have here. Every excuse I ever heard made perfect sense to the person who made it, which is such a true statement. And I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you what happened. My cat decided to tear up my homework. That's really what happened. It's not an excuse, but it's also not accountability. So back to an example that I can share. This summer, I had a coaching client who came to me. She was a working mom. And she said, she called me one afternoon and for our session, very distraught, very frustrated. So I said, okay, well, tell me what's been going on. Let's see if we can dive in a little deeper and find out how to help you. And I actually, her exact words were, I've explained to the kids how they're supposed to do their chores. I've shown them how they're supposed to do dishes and wipe down the countertops and sweep the kitchen floor before I come home from work. So why do they insist on not cleaning the stove off? The stove is right next to the counter. They know they're supposed to wipe everything down. But when I came home, macaroni and cheese was all over the stove. And to make matters worse, when I came back from lunch and walked through the parking lot to get to my office, the trash can top had blown off and there were trash was just blowing around everywhere. And I know I was the last person to take lunch this day. So 7 other employees had walked through the parking lot with trash everywhere, but nobody stopped to clean it up. No wonder I'm burned out. I have to do everything. So thinking about that situation, you can see first off what causes burnout. But secondly, and I know somebody had put this in the chat already, but having the unclear expectations. Explaining the kids had told her, and she and I kind of joked about it later after we calmed down and we talked through a lot of different details. She said, yeah, the kids' response to her was, well, Mommy told us and you showed us how to wipe off the countertop, but you never told us that the stove needed to be wiped off as well. Now, accountability means you see that it needs to be done and you do it. But also accountability from a leader's point of view means you try to put out the expectation and you set the environment up where when you see things that need to get done, you do it. So we talked earlier about who was responsible through it all of us, in every single example. Probably the most important item to think about is in these types of questions, who's responsible to be successful? So now that we've kind of talked about the definitions of accountability, the difference between accountability and responsibility, who needs to be accountable? We're now talking about the why is it hard sometimes to hold people accountable? Let's dive into the how. The how's where the meat and potatoes are, and it's what helps us be able to get out of this burnout or these stuck cycles that we're in. So, how to create accountability. Once again, this slide has been adapted from the book, The Oz Principle. And specifically what it talks about is accountability is almost a two-side process, or in this case, it's above the line and below the line. Now let's start with the below the line, mainly because I think most people can relate to it. And a lot of the examples I've been sharing talk about the below the line. And below the line thinking and behavior sits in the mind as the world is happening to me. It's where we place blame. We're the victim. This is all happening to me. My cat tore the paper up. I didn't do it. We find a fault. We only see problems. We wait for someone else. The client that I had who was walking through the parking lot full of trash, everybody saw the same trash. They were waiting for the next person to do something. But they do nothing. They focus on issues. They feel like they have no control. There's another client that I can share with you that she was frustrated because her boss kept assigning her duties, and yet she didn't feel she had the empowerment, the authority to complete the duties. And in the conversation, I said, well, have you addressed this? And her comments, well, I can't do that. Okay, well, let's explore that a little bit. Share with me. Has there been other situations where you've tried to address this and you weren't able to? Well, it basically is we went through our conversation. It came to she didn't want to get the authority, because if she did get the authority and if the project didn't turn out right, they would blame her. They would point fingers at her. And so if she didn't have the authority, she couldn't complete it, but she also wasn't being accountable, and she couldn't get ahead in the company because of it. So it's important to realize that even when we feel we may not have control, let's take it another step and see, is there something else that we might be able to do? So now that we've looked at the below the line thinking, let's go above the line. That's where the juicy action is. That's where accountability happens. Above the line thinking focuses on taking action. And the most important item is it focuses on making a choice, seeing something, providing feedback, owning it, seeing possibilities, solving the problem, doing what needs to be done. So as I said earlier, it's easy to get stuck below the line. We've all done it. It's so commonplace that nowadays we actually even consider it part of human nature to justify, to deflect, to point fingers. It's kind of commonplace. But what's the danger if we stay below the line? What happens? So go ahead and type in the chat. What do you think is the danger if we keep our below the line thinking as opposed to moving to the above the line thinking? Not having a growth mindset. That is terrific. You are correct. We give away power. Oh, beautiful. That's brilliant. Conflict, most definitely. I don't know, back to the parent situation. I'm the mom of 4 kids. Trust me, there was a lot of conflict about accountability in my household. Lack of empowerment, no motivation. Yes, these are all items. If we get stuck in below the line thinking, these are items that impact us. And that impact, not only does it have a consequence from an inability to grow, to get ahead, to be able to get that promotion, but it also has some physical impact because we're always thinking that we're the victim. We're always feeling like we're being weighed down. We're seeing the negative. And sooner or later, that stress starts to build up. And I love the way Anna just put in there, we're not seeing the whole picture. So the truth of the matter is we all possess the ability to accomplish goals and resolve challenges. The choice we have to make is to take the Ashoff defense and stay above the line. So let's go ahead then and move forward with accountability. When we face a challenge, in order to keep ourselves above the line, once again, adapted from the Oz principle, they use these simple steps: see it, own it, solve it, do it. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these. See it is pretty simple. What it means is, as leaders, we may not always be aware of all of the problems. Now, if we are aware of the problem, we can then take action on it, but we might not even be aware of it. So as leaders, we're responsible to make sure that we take the correct task of asking questions. And some of those questions might be something as simple as, what's working well? Or one of the favorite ones that I used when I was supervising staff is, if you could change one thing today, what would it be? Now, I never guaranteed that I would change anything, but it was a great data point for me to be able to see everything that was possibly causing problems. And by doing so, I personally, or I could talk to the team about the accountability piece of what can we do to make that better. So seeing it is one item. As we see things, we want to make sure that we're seeing it in reality. What are some other ways? We've talked about asking questions. Are there some other ways that you can think of that we might be able to see the problems or the challenges? Evolve it. I do like that. I'm going to write that one down. I haven't seen that one, April. Thank you for sharing. I love when I'm on these events and people can teach me things as well. This is awesome. Thank you. So, some other ways besides asking questions to be able to see it is good old-fashioned observation. And I know it's been a little more challenging now through the pandemic, but the management by walking around or the observation of our projects getting turned in on time, timelines being met, there's a couple of different ways that you can see things without actually just asking the questions. It's the physical seeing it, but it's also anticipating. If I were a customer and I'm going to use this product in this way, how would I expect it to work? And does it work that way? So now that we've covered the see it, let's dive down a little deeper into the own it. The own it stage is pretty simple. It is just making the decision, taking the choice that I see something that needs to be done and I'm going to work to resolve it. It doesn't stop there, however. So when we talk about the own it, we're talking about it from a personal, individual perspective, but we're also talking about it from the collective. What we want to do is learn to take our individual responsibility that is independent, but also create joint accountability that is interdependent, and communicate that, have transparency around it for the rest of the team. Moving on to solve it. Solve it, I always put in as its own slide because there's some very specific steps that you'll want to go through. You want to stay engaged. When facing any problem or challenge, sometimes the easy route is to give up. It's not always the right route. Not going to say it isn't appropriate sometimes, but do your best to stay engaged in the situation, the problem, whatever the challenge is, to resolve whatever it is. Be persistent. For me, persistence is a challenge when it comes to exercise. I don't enjoy exercising, and so I need to stay engaged and stay persistent. If I take a week off, that's a really bad habit for me to get into. So it's a matter of me staying engaged and being persistent with the exercise. Thinking differently. I'm sure we've probably all heard this before. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking where we created them. So basically, we can't have the same thought process going into the solving the problem, because that's the thought process we used that created the problem. And the only way to think differently is to start talking to other people, get different perspectives, look at it from a different point of view, force yourself to do brainstorming on a specific topic. And then the last item is stay conscious. Make sure that you're fully aware of how things are happening and what impact this action could have on this other piece. The final step is, oops, there we go. I got a little too happy there. Just do it. And Nike has the slogan for a reason. Just do it. Take action, put the plan into motion. Now, the truth is, this sounds really easy on paper. I just gave you 4 steps. Everybody should be able to be accountable, right? It's not easy. It's really challenging. And all of us tend to slip below the line sometimes. If you think about it, I'm sure all of us have had a situation where we vented to somebody. And instead of just venting, think about bringing the solution as well. Now, sometimes we may just have to vent to get things off our chest. That is a little bit below the line thinking. But as long as we limit the amount of time for it to happen, is a very positive thing. Make sure that you continue to think about, how am I going to keep myself above the line? How am I going to find solutions? How am I going to make a choice and realize what I can control? So what ideas do you have to help keep your thinking above the line? Go ahead and put those into chat right now. Getting creative. Oh, I love that one. That's a really good one. For many of us, because we are so task oriented, and in the business world, that's what we need to be able to be process procedure oriented. Being creative is helpful. Creating a plan, a process in writing. And I love the key word there, in writing. Fabulous point. Thank you for sharing, Nicole. So, how to build a culture of accountability. Moving on. Building a culture of accountability is really focusing on communication skills. So initially we talked about the steps for you to learn to be accountable. It's the see it, the own it, the solve it, the do it steps. And then now I'm going to add the evolve it step. But holding people accountable starts by defining results. It's being very specific with what those results need to look like. And potentially the very first thing you want to define for them when it comes to results is the fact that we, as an organization, expect accountability from everybody. And what does that look like? That looks like when you walk through the parking lot, if you see trash, it's up to you to pick it up. Don't wait for somebody else. Just do it because it needs to be done. Be very clear with the expectations. Back to the example I was sharing of the client, she was very clear on the expectation of cleaning off the countertop. The kids were very creative in saying, well, the countertop ends here, the stove is here. Make sure that you're very clear in your expectations. And in that case, what it might mean is she should have started by saying, okay, the kitchen, here's the boundary of the kitchen. And so what I would like you to do, I'm going to show you the specifics. I'm going to show you how to make sure you do the dishes right. I'm going to teach you how to wipe off the countertops. I'm going to show you how to sweep the kitchen floor. However, what I expect you to do is take it a step further and take a step back, scan the entire area. And is everything clean? If it isn't, go ahead, finish. You can be very clear with expectations. Be transparent. That is another area that is so important, is making sure that you're transparent with everything. And in being transparent, it means if you've made a mistake, own it. So in that case, with the individual, the client I had with her children, at first she was really frustrated, but by the time we talked through it that evening, she went and talked to her kids, and they actually had a pretty good laugh over it. And she said, you know what, I have to take some accountability here. You're right. I told you countertops, and the stove isn't the countertop. However, this is really what I meant when I was talking about the countertops. So it's being transparent. Define a check-in time. When you're talking about holding staff accountable to projects and results, it's helping them have a check-in time so that you can ensure that they're still above the line thinking and that there aren't problems or challenges being faced. Also, to make sure that it's still on track. Provide feedback. And feedback can come in many ways. It's being able to ask first how they think things are going, but also sharing how you see things going. Providing feedback could also be part of your coaching at the employee level, providing coaching to them. When the entire process is done and you're at the results, make sure you do what's called an after action review. Make sure you're checking to see, okay, what went well? What do we need to change? Were the expectations clearly defined, or did you need greater definition at that check-in? How can we define the results in the future to be better and more in tune to the project? And then the very last item is always celebrate. Celebrate your successes. And this talks about the little ones and the big ones. When you hold yourself accountable and you see something that needs to be done and you do it, later that night when you're closing out your planner, put a little check mark there. Make sure that you're acknowledging the fact that you kept the above the line thinking for the day. You were striving to be able to keep that above the line thinking. It's easy to slip below it. So we always need to celebrate that we're staying above it. Accountability, wrapping it up. This is a quote from the Oz Principle book. Remember, only when you assume full accountability for your thoughts, feelings, actions, and results can you direct your own destiny. Otherwise, someone or something else will. So part of being accountable is making the choice to be able to control what you can control. There's going to be things that are outside of your control. I think this pandemic has proven that for all of us. However, we had a lot of choices with the pandemic regarding how we personally were going to handle it and what it was going to hold us back. I have a friend of mine who had started a business right towards the end of 2019. So her business, it was the last quarter of 2019. She was just starting it up. And then we hit the pandemic. Now, she could have allowed that event to crush her business. But instead, she did as many other businesses did. She pivoted quickly, and she actually had 48% growth from the third quarter in 2020 to the fourth quarter in 2019. So she did 50% greater than she had. And then at the end, by the fourth quarter, she was up to 60% better year over year. So for a business who started in the middle of a pandemic or right before the pandemic, she was able to make it work. And she did it by realizing that she had choices and she wasn't going to allow things outside of her control to define how successful she could be. So next steps. How are you going to apply everything that we've just discussed for about the last, 45 minutes? What can you start today that will be able to help you stay above the line, create personal accountability and team accountability? Go ahead and put into chat some ideas that you have on how you're going to utilize some of the knowledge you've learned today. While we're waiting for that to come in, I'll just let you all know, get in touch with us. Please feel free to work with us. My email is on this screen. You are more than welcome to reach out to me if you would like. But more importantly, I'd highly encourage you to book a free consult with one of our relationship specialists who can help you match to one of the coaches. Justice, I'll turn it over to him. He can give you more information about this.
Thank you so much, Laura, for all that. There's definitely some
Of
really good takeaways from that. And like she mentioned, if you are feeling burnout just because you feel like you're doing all the work, if you need help with, creating that accountability and just holding yourself to that, please go ahead. I'm going to drop my link right now. You can go ahead and schedule a time to speak with us. It is first come, first serve, so feel free to jump in there, but I'd love to have a conversation with you. And Laura, remind me, how many spots do you have left for taking on new clients?
I have 3 spots.
Great. Okay, perfect. So if you'd like to, continue a conversation with Laura, I would love to help facilitate that. That being said, when you come fill out the intake form, indicate that you came to us from the webinar because we are going to be giving you your first session free if you do complete the enrollment process with us. So something to keep in mind as you are thinking through things. But with that being said, I'm also going to drop the link to our website directly where you can learn about all the other things that we offer as well as coaches and just anything and everything you would need. So here is that for you guys. Oh, Laura's great. She's your coach, Jennifer Miller.
I was going to say Jennifer's on the line. I didn't know that. Welcome, Jennifer. So good to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for this today.
With that being said, we can jump into the Q&A. If you're comfortable coming off of mute to ask your question, feel free to. Otherwise, you want to just type them in the chat and we can go ahead and get through some questions now.
And while we're waiting, I do want to thank everyone for being so interactive. That is, to me, the biggest value of any of these presentations is to hear your feedback, get your input, and just sharing with one another. So thank you for continuing to do that.
We do have one question in the chat. It says, do you know any resources about accountability? And then it says board of directors. Jackie, are you meaning that you are on the board of directors, or are you trying to hold them accountable? I would love a little bit more clarification on that. But while we wait, do you know any resources about accountability, Laura?
I do. As you can see from my background, this is a real background back here. I tend to be a book nerd. So there are two resources. I know I've talked about it quite a bit throughout the presentation. The Oz Principle is one book that I do encourage people to read. However, the one that I found to be the easier read and probably more appropriate for most businesses is the 85% Solution. This book is by Linda Galando. She talks about, from all aspects, all different walks of life, all different professions, how we can use the 85% rule of being 85% more accountable in a day.
And then in our recap email, the resources you mentioned, there will be links in there to check out those books, as well as a recording for this. So we'll get those all sent to you guys. Another question we have, how do you balance your own accountability versus holding the rest of the team accountable?
Balancing my own accountability, it starts with making sure that you're going through the steps. And then balancing that, as you said, so that you're not, and if I'm not understanding the question right, please make sure to let me know. But being able to not overstep where you're now doing the work of what the team should be able to step up to do. That does go back to making sure that you've clearly defined the results and that you've clearly defined the expectations. When it comes to the expectations, that would also be the roles. For example, a team project, one of the examples I can actually give is a client of mine is a student, and they're doing a lot of group projects at school. And it's what they discovered is that one piece didn't get done, but it was because it wasn't clearly defined in the expectation that you're going to do this piece, you're going to do this piece, you're going to do this piece. Well, one piece didn't get done. And because of it, it did impact their grade. So to ensure that you yourself don't become overwhelmed, always circling back. And maybe when you're doing that check-in, go back and refine and look at the expectations and see if maybe there's something else that needs to be added. I hope that answered the question.
Fantastic. Okay, got a couple more.
Okay.
How do you hold the team accountable when you've no formal authority in the team? Example, as a Scrum Master.
Perfect. Okay, and that is a great question. And I think part of the reason that I think it's a great question is because accountability doesn't take a leader. It doesn't take a person who's the manager or the boss to say so. It's a team agreement, and it's almost a team charter. Part of the charter that says we're going to hold one another accountable. And in that, it will look like XYZ. So it does go back to that transparency and the expectation piece. To be frank, the Oz principle, it does talk about, not specifically the Scrum Master piece, but it does talk about team accountability and individuals who are not necessarily in an authority role. They're just all team members, and how you can have the agreement among everybody that we are going to, first off, bring our best forward every day. And then secondly, that we're going to call one another out if we need to, when they start to have that below the line thinking. That's probably the best way to describe it.
While you're talking about the Oz principle, someone else asked, do the authors discuss the psychological constructs of internal and external locus of control and relate it to the above and below line thinking?
No, but that sounds like a fabulous research document. That would actually be very true. And there might be other books that do cover that specifically. They do not. They keep it more focused on just the individual and applying it in the team environment is probably the way I would put it.
Great question. And then there's one more typed up right now. I feel like I finally I'm saying the same things over and over and probably sound more like a parent the more I'm saying something. How do I go about the same problem without preaching?
Fabulous question. And I know I've done that. I did it with my children. So I understand what you're speaking of. What you need to do is ensure that there is the clear expectation, the clear understanding of what needs to be accomplished. And the important piece on that is because it's one thing to be able to say it. I would also encourage somebody actually typed in, put it in writing, and most importantly, have the other individual write it up. You can provide guidance for them, but have them write it, because that way you'll feel and you'll read what their understanding of the expectation. And if it's off center a little bit, it will give you the opportunity to be able to discuss it, tweak it, and make sure that it's on target. I hope that helps.
Perfect. All right. That's all the questions in the chat for the moment. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to type in? Or again, you are welcome to come off of mute. Oh, Nicole said thank you. So I think you answered her question perfectly.
Okay, wonderful. My pleasure.
I just want to have a quick follow-up. I'm the Scrum Master that asked the question earlier.
Okay.
So at the end of each sprint, we look at the deliveries and what was undelivered, and then we have this application called Jira, where we look at the stats of the team.
Mhm.
Now, I'm sometimes conflicted because I want to acknowledge what work they have done, but also to let them know what work that wasn't done.
Mhm.
So basically, how do I show them that, guys, this is what we did, without appearing to point fingers that you guys messed up, especially when they failed to deliver certain, to make certain deliveries, which were critical. So how balancing, showing them the data to help let them see what they have failed to do, without appearing to point fingers at them.
And thank you for sharing that. That's a great example. My question back would be, when you originally were starting out the sprint, did you define that item that was failed, that didn't get accomplished?
Mhm.
Was that already part of the set, or was it something that was added later?
It was part of the set. So usually we take what we call user stories, about say 8 to 10 into the sprint of about 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then they work towards delivering each of those stories into production or release. And
Okay.
sometimes they are able to accomplish only 6 or 5 or 6. And then, usually we now look at the ones that were not delivered, look at the stats in terms of how quickly they move through the board and those kind of things. But I always want to acknowledge the good things they have done, and then ask them, guys, we didn't do this. What do you think happened, and how can I help?
And actually, the way that you just shared that, guys, we didn't get this done. What do you think happened? And how can I help? That is awesome. It's not necessarily placing blame, because what you are doing is, this was explained up front. We all agreed to it.
Mhm.
We weren't able to get to it. Why weren't we able to get to it? What's holding us back? Why can't we get this piece? And that's what you're doing, is really moving into that brainstorming role of trying to figure out why it's not getting done. Do there need to be more resources? Maybe it's a step that has been added in, but the individuals are realizing, oh, it's not really necessary.
Right.
But that without a conversation to ask questions like you just talked about, it would be difficult to be able to determine that. So actually, what you said, spot on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And honestly, on the outside looking in, that's something like hearing that I'm comfortable enough to, disclose both those questions. So like brainstorm and work through that. So that's something that, not knowing what it was specifically, I would feel comfortable to have that conversation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? And while we wait, we do have weekly webinars. So I'm going to drop the link for our Eventbrite page in case anyone wants to check out any upcoming ones and register for those. Well, there's no more questions. Thank you so much for your time today, Laura. And thank you everyone again for joining us. As Laura mentioned earlier, happy Veterans Day to all those and your families.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful working through this with you. Stay accountable. Goodbye.
Have a great day and weekend, everyone. Stay safe.